This is System Crash, a weekly tech news show willing to tell the hard truths about how tech and the titans who own and operate it is really transforming the world. I'm Paris Marks.
And I'm Brian Merchant. I'm getting better at that, I think. I'm getting
You are.
It's like always like a question mark, and I'm Brian Merchant. Like, am I still supposed to be here? I guess I am.
The volume is like slowly coming up as well.
I'll nail it one of these days. Yeah.
You got this. Yeah. I'm sure the listeners are enjoying hearing the evolution of you saying your name.
To perfection.
But this week, we have a very special guest, our first guest, the one and only Molly White. Molly, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be the first.
When we were thinking about first guests, we were like, who's going to be? And you were like at the top of our list. We were like, we know we have to have Molly on, not just because crypto is a big thing, but because Molly is awesome. So
Yeah. Match made in our rotting dystopia. So perfection. Yeah.
podcast heaven, right here. Molly White is the creator of Web3 is Going Just Great and Follow the Crypto, world-renowned crypto critic, and now the official first guest of System Crash.
I'll put that right at the top of my resume.
Yeah. You need to update your website tomorrow. Yeah.
Maybe we'll make you a badge or something. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah. Molly, now, first question. So everyone is familiar with Luigi Mangione now. Do we even need to introduce who this guy is? I think everyone knows he shot the healthcare executive.
Allegedly.
Alleged. It's
We don't know. Different people have these eyebrows.
Yeah, exactly. Go to X, and it's like the first thing that is like algorithmically shoved in your face is like 19 conspiracy theories that are based on his eyebrows and whether it was an op.
I actually had someone tell me that the photo of him at like the Starbucks looks kind of like me, which
Like you?
it's hard to recognize when something looks like you, because like only you look like you. But I did look at the picture and I was like, that looks kind of like my brother. And then I was like, oh no.
Do you have something you want to add to the FBI's investigation?
Poor Luigi has been framed.
But listen, Molly, this is what we were wondering, right? So we've heard some things about Luigi.
Well, it's turned out that he's like a tech guy. He went to Penn and was a computer science guy, and his Twitter feed is very, he's retweeting videos about Peter Thiel, and his last tweet was like sharing a Andrew Huberman podcast. So he's like very much in that like tech sphere.
And he goes to the gym.
He's ripped. He's, people are saying he's kind
Much
of
like
hot.
most computer scientists.
Yeah, they're all like that, right? Yeah.
But I will say it is like a very specific kind of like interested in being public facing computer scientist. So what's the over under here? Does he have a crypto wallet?
I mean, he has to.
Yeah, right.
Anyone who watches that much Joe Rogan and, is so focused on the future of technology has to have bought into the crypto grift at some point, I think.
If we go a bit further back in his tweets, like maybe we'll find it.
Musk like took down the profile for a second and people are like, wow, Elon did something responsible. And then he like put it back up and it's verified. Like he just verified the account and now it just like
He's monetized the account now or something.
Exactly. He gave him a blue badge.
Gonna get a check when he gets out of prison.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure somebody can go back far enough. Like, does he go straight for the Bitcoin, or does he have some Ethereum, or has he got like weird obscure coins? What do you think?
I would definitely guess Bitcoin.
Yeah.
It seems like it follows with the ethos. Maybe some weird meme coins or, Polymarket maybe in there, depending on how recently online he was. Yeah, I can see that.
Do you think he's a Dogecoin owner?
Maybe that's too me. Maybe that's too. You're the expert. Does Dogecoin still get traded? Are people still moving Dogecoin?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Especially with Elon Musk now sort of becoming shadow vice president. He's like the mascot for Dogecoin. So it's definitely been popular in recent days.
How much Doge do you have?
That guy who made it totally lost control of that meme coin. It's so sad.
Yeah. Well, obviously, we'll have to wait and see with Luigi and see if his crypto bona fides are revealed. We wanted to have Molly on to really dive into sort of the whole crypto universe. I feel like it was a huge part of this election cycle. It was...
What? It crashed like 2 years ago. Nothing happened since then. That's what
And it died then.
Yeah.
You joke about that, but like honestly, I feel like a lot of people kind of made assumptions that like rhyme with that. Like personally, I kind of like I was aware enough to see the prices going up again, but I was like, there's just like every couple of days, it was like, there's no way. There's no way. And it's like climbing thousands of dollars. And it's like, there's no way. And yet against all
Oh no, was
logic,
Michael Saylor right?
Yeah, it just defies logic to me. So Fortunately, we have Molly here who understands this world better than anybody, but it also like has just very pertinent sort of ramifications for what's coming next. It influenced the election in a huge way. It's going to be like part of our lives now. Donald Trump is very overtly pro crypto now. It's like going to be part of the political project in a way that it hasn't been before. Obviously, it was prominent and it was a part of the discourse and part of the tech industry and a very specific part of it. But now, would you say it's fair to say that it is going to be bigger than ever? Like, we're going to have to be paying more attention to this. Bitcoin just is past $100,000 at some point, almost purely as a financial speculative vehicle, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I do think that crypto has re-entered the public consciousness in a way that is sort of unavoidable. And it does this from time to time in different variations. There was ICOs, which were really interesting to like businessy folks who thought it would be fun to have, public offerings that you didn't have to go through the SEC. There was NFTs, there was sort of the whole crypto explosion of retail marketing in 2020 or 2021. But like now, it's definitely come back in a very different and unavoidable way where it has sort of infiltrated the political sphere. It's becoming an institutional asset. It's sort of threatening to become a part of people's financial lives, whether they like it or not. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that, we need to be paying attention to crypto more than ever right now.
Yeah, it really sucks to see that. Like to have to pay attention to crypto again in this way.
Yeah.
It's like, no, we wanted that to just end and we could move on and we could get annoyed with AI bros, not AI bros and crypto bros at the same time. Like that is not what we want. How did crypto go from being like this thing that collapsed through 2021 and into 2022? We see Sam Bankman-Fried going to prison eventually because of all this stuff, and a bunch of other of these crypto figures like face legal repercussions or like, kind of end up out in the wilderness of all these discussions until I guess recently. How do we go from that like crash to all of this power that they have really built over the past year, it seems?
I really blame it on the sort of political project that came out of the crypto industry over the last year, although, the seeds of it began earlier than that. But there was this very coordinated effort by the cryptocurrency industry, not only to spend millions and millions of dollars, over $100 million on elections, but also to engage in this really narrowly targeted PR campaign to convince politicians primarily that cryptocurrency was something that people care about to the extent that they will be voting based on their pro-crypto beliefs, and that as a result, candidates who are running for office need to embrace cryptocurrency or else face the repercussions of losing voters, often in demographics that they're trying to attract, young people, people of color. They were going very hard on the idea that this is how you can reach Black voters or young voters or other voters that might not otherwise be interested in your campaign. And so they were able to really insert themselves into the political conversation over the past year in somewhat unexpected ways. And then through doing so, they have reinserted themselves in the much broader public conversations around crypto. Crypto prices have come back up over the past year again, but certainly, that was something that began a while ago. But, crypto is one of those things where it's so based on vibes and, the narrative that the more crypto can insert itself into the conversation, whatever conversation that is, the political arena, mainstream media, whatever it might be, the more it profits from that kind of conversation. The more people who are talking about it, the more people are buying in, the more the price goes up. So I think it's really just sort of a combination of that political strategy with some bounce back in price.
Yeah, that's really interesting, right? That's a whole sort of ideological element of crypto, is that it's intensely free market, and it's like radically freed from sort of like the dictates of the market and sort of any regulatory reach. So it is interesting to hear that, there was this very concerted effort, and there's been some, I think, interesting reporting that I've seen. There's a pretty good New Yorker piece on Fair Shake and how, this effort really kind of was orchestrated. So like, was there sort of a moment a couple years ago where a lot of prime players in crypto who kind of survived the crash, a lot of people kind of either took their lumps and maybe went into AI or did something else. But a lot of people, as you've documented, have survived and now even thrived. So was there like a moment where they kind of said, all right, like, how do we move on from here? Do we need to start like building political power? Was this an actual sort of political project? Is there a sense that there's now a new found arm of like a pointed political project?
Well, ironically enough, I think it actually began with Sam Bankman-Fried in a lot of ways. Shortly before FTX's collapse, he was spending heavily on politics, both in public and via dark money donations. He was hanging out in Washington, arguably more than he was even, present at his own company. He was proposing very specific policy changes to benefit supposedly crypto, broadly speaking, although I think a lot of them would have mostly just benefited his company. And so he was sort of laying the groundwork for the strategy that the rest of the crypto industry followed in the most recent years. Even one of the PACs that he was involved with sort of morphed into the PACs that we saw very active in this most recent election. And so I think they realized that maybe this wasn't such a bad idea to buy influence in Washington, to have very focused lobbyists to the point that they're CEOs of some of the biggest companies. And sure, there was all that fraud and whatever. We can wipe that away, but
and maybe just do less of that or do less obvious versions.
Just be better at it, I think, is the strategy.
Just change the laws to make it okay.
Well, yeah.
Molly, you're talking about how this political project was formed and how Sam Bankman-Fried was really key to what we have seen today during the election. And, we're going to get to everything we've seen and what has come after that. But I wonder, in that couple years where this project was able to be built to such a degree where we have seen the impact that crypto has had on the election today, was there a failure from regulators and political leadership not to nip this in the bud and take it seriously much earlier in a way that could have avoided what we have seen and the amount of money that they have been able to deploy in the political process over the past year?
I mean, I think that failure goes all the way back to 2010, with the Citizens United decision and the explosion of money in politics that has resulted from it. The fact that billionaires and executives of these corporations and the corporations themselves can spend hundreds of millions of dollars to influence politics in this way is sort of a predictable outcome from that decision, I think. And we're seeing it get worse and worse and worse every year. And, this, I think, is going to be a very stark example of what happens when you allow that to happen. And, I suspect the next 4 years will show us the ramifications of that, unfortunately.
Yeah, as someone abroad, it's always wild to see that a political campaign for president in the United States can cost $1 billion because of all the money. It just blows the mind. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just fake amounts of money. It's like with crypto, the numbers are so big that there's no way to even conceive of it.
Yeah, it just sloshes around. And as we see, it was the Harris campaign that raised $1 billion and she lost. So you can raise $1 billion and spend it, on political campaigns and still lose.
And they're still asking for money because they overspent.
Right. They overbooked Beyonce or whatever. So So that is really interesting. So the ground was set from, we've already talked about sort of on the show earlier how sort of a lot of these problems stem from past political decisions, past political inabilities to sort of tamp down on companies that were gathering so much power and so much capital. And then now in the tech sector, there's some of the biggest companies ever, and they can wield this capital and wield this money to influence elections. And crypto, I think, did this in an interesting way. So before we start talking about Trump, can you talk a little bit about how crypto sort of did influence this last election? Specifically, they spent a lot of money, we know, but they did some interesting things, not just saying, oh, crypto is great. They were very sly. They ran a bunch of ads that didn't even mention crypto, right?
Yeah, it was an interesting strategy to watch for sure. And I was sort of baffled by it at the beginning until it began to sort of come into focus what they were doing. But the strategy early on was to have these really splashy expenditures, mostly in primary races, to sort of flex their power in a way. So one of the earliest expenditures, and certainly the largest one for a long time out of the crypto PACs, was to oppose Katie Porter in California, where she was running for Senate. And that was a strange one to me at first, because I was like, Katie Porter doesn't really care about crypto that much. She's gone up against corporate power and that type of thing, but she's never been very specific about crypto. And I was like, I guess maybe she's seen as like a Elizabeth Warren ally, and that would be why. But really, it became clear that that strategy, and it was one that they would use again against Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush in primaries as well, was to target people who are in very high-profile races who could be sort of plausibly construed to be anti-crypto, even if they had no real strong statements on the subject, and who were already at a strong risk of losing their campaigns. You know, they were all facing pretty challenging competitors. Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman were also facing significant opposition spending from AIPAC. And so they sort of picked those races, and then when the candidates lost, they made a big stink about how it was because they were anti-crypto and because they had decided to challenge crypto that they had lost their elections. And then they really morphed that into a campaign to convince candidates that you'll be next if you take an oppositional stance towards crypto, if you don't sign on to the crypto agenda. But also look at all this money you could earn from us, that you could win from us, basically, if you make even just like the most benign sort of hand wavy gesture towards the cryptocurrency industry. And then the actual attempts that they made to win over voters, such as they were as you described. You know, there were no statements about cryptocurrency in the vast majority of ads that were run by these PACs, because they understood that despite their marketing and despite their PR claims, people don't actually vote based on pro-crypto beliefs.
What? I'm shocked.
I know. There are like certainly people out there who hold crypto, they care about crypto, they want to see a friendly regulatory environment, but like most crypto holders, believe it or not, are pretty normal people with other concerns when it comes to elections. They are not single issue crypto voters. And even the polls commissioned by the cryptocurrency industry really did not support the claim that there were all of these single issue crypto voters out there waiting for politicians to take a friendly stance so they could then vote for them. You mentioned that New Yorker piece. In that New Yorker piece, they quote a strategist who was working with Fairshake and Coinbase and the political apparatus behind all this, saying, we'll just make it up, pretty much. You know, we know there's no crypto voter. We'll just pretend there is one. And as long as we say it loudly enough, that will be useful to our ends. And it seems like that was true to some extent.
Yeah, it is almost antithetical to like the ethos of crypto, which is that, you know, like, oh, we want this free market tool that people can buy into or not. And then it's really just like a concerted project to build power in a specific way, to like display that power specifically to policymakers. And I feel like in hindsight, there was that moment, remember when Kamala was like, we're going to like be friendly or look into, or made a statement about like resetting with crypto. And we're like, everyone was like, what? Where did that come from? And clearly in context now, it's like, oh, well, they've had their ear to the ground. They knew that there were these players throwing a lot of money around in a very specific way. And at least one of her consultants or advisors was like, maybe this is worth checking out. Like, they are a force.
That's something that happened across the races that these PACs were involved with, where it would sort of come out of left field to the people who were voting in these races, you know, to the actual constituents. They'd be like, why does my candidate care about crypto? I have so many other local issues that I need them to focus on, so many more important things, and they're out here spouting off about crypto. And it was like really baffling and kind of unnerving to a lot of people. It was a turnoff, I think, for some voters whose, you know, potential representatives got a little too lost in the sauce when it came to talking about crypto, because normal people were like, hi, crypto policy is not even close to the top of the list of things I care about. What are you doing, you know?
Excuse me, this is a school board election. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah,
like, you know?
right.
Yeah.
But there's like this reality distortion field around crypto where, you know, a lot of people in crypto, and often even the executives of these companies and sort of important people in this sector, believe crypto is this huge force in people's lives day to day, like normal everyday people, not just the very Twitter poisoned. And I think we saw that really clearly demonstrated during the period of time where, Kamala had replaced Biden as the nominee, and the crypto industry was sort of suddenly trying to get her to sign on to their agenda. And they held this like crypto roundtable or something like that with a bunch of the executives from these companies and various other people. And one of the Winklevosses, I don't remember which one, but one of the Winklevoss twins tweeted afterwards that he was like so horrified that Kamala Harris didn't show up on this Zoom call of crypto executives. And he was like, what could she possibly have been doing that was more important than this? And people were like, literally anything.
Of all the things, yeah.
Well, what a crazy and what a great, like horrifying, but great example of just like the power of sheer capital, right? You can do this. You can insert it into local. If you have enough money and you have a canny political strategy now, and I appreciated, I think, one of your recent videos where you went back and sort of explained to your viewers the ramifications of Citizens United and sort of the opening of the field to like just unlimited amounts of money and political spending. And certainly crypto wasn't on a lot of people's radar as like a major player in shaping the election. And yet it turned out to be one of the major sort of sources of influence and campaign sort of fuel in this weird way that you've just described. I will admit also to kind of underestimating it, despite reading your stuff and despite sort of even knowing the basic lay of the land, it still kind of snuck up on us.
Yeah, no, I think it really came out of left field. And, even watching it, I was surprised at how durable the narrative was that they were trying to install. But, I think one thing that's also been very successful for them is, I mentioned this in the video you referred to, but a lot of the strategy was really just backing the winners, choosing people, in a very similar way as they opposed people they thought were likely to lose in the primaries.
Yeah.
They backed a lot of people that were pretty much guaranteed to win their races in the general elections. And then they were able to promote this win rate as though, like, look, American voters came out and told us how much they care about crypto because they elected this guy who had like no serious opposition in his race,
Right.
or whatever it was.
And then they get to say also, right, like, and like we played a part in that, like pay attention to us.
It's a great PR strategy. Yeah.
I mean, it is a very canny PR strategy. And I think it's one that they're going to really lean on going forward as well, where they'll say, look at how successful we were in the last race. All of this was because of us. None of these people would have won if it wasn't for us. And then, going forward, they can sort of flex that power regardless of whether or not they meaningfully impacted any of the races that they spent in. A lot of the races, they were not donating that much money and then not making that much of an impact, but they were able to say, all right, check this one off as a win because we nominally backed this candidate who was already going to win anyway.
It is wild to hear all of that, right? To see how strategic they were. Obviously they hired, I'm sure, very well paid and seasoned people in order to run these sorts of things. They had a lot of money, as you're saying, and as you have been reporting on Follow the Crypto, through this election cycle. But I feel like maybe we should pivot to what the potential consequences of this are going to be now that the Republicans and Trump have won. And now that we're moving into this era where it looks like the crypto folks are going to have a lot of influence on the policy measures that, we're going to be seeing over the coming 4 years or whatnot.
So where are we at right now? Like, what does crypto look like today? Like, Bitcoin is soaring high. Is there like a way to, I know it's like in a tangled, massive, like cascading industry and field, but like, how would you describe crypto now in the wake of like Trump's victory going into 2025?
Well, I mean, price-wise, crypto is up, broadly speaking. Bitcoin is breaking new records as far as price, and then other crypto assets often follow Bitcoin to a large extent, and so they've been up as well. A lot of cryptocurrencies that are sort of associated with people who are now in these weird positions of power have been doing surprisingly well. So, for example, Elon Musk is sort of got Trump's ear. He is seen as the sort of mascot for the Dogecoin cryptocurrency. And so Dogecoin has been doing well because people are hoping that Elon Musk will somehow benefit Dogecoin in his newfound powerful seat.
Well, it must be the official crypto coin of the new government department, right?
Right, exactly. David Sachs has been named to this new crypto representative position. He's seen as sort of closely allied with like the Solana ecosystem. And so the Solana people are all excited. It's a lot of this really sort of like naked cash grab based on sudden power type of stuff that's happening.
Favor trading, transactionalism.
Right. And then there's a lot of people who are excited about potential regulatory changes where, oh, now it's going to be legal to do all these things that a lot of companies had shied away from because they were worried about potential regulatory action. And now, we can bet on all these companies that otherwise maybe didn't have a shot because they weren't allowed to operate in the US. So there's a lot of that as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I guess what we've been seeing there, right? Like, you're talking about the types of regulations that they want to see. Obviously one of their big enemies has been Gary Gensler at the Securities and Exchange Commission. They also really don't like Elizabeth Warren and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Now that Trump is coming to power in January, what are the types of things that the crypto industry is looking for? And what are they likely to get now that they clearly have Trump's ear? They have David Sachs, as you're saying, as the AI crypto czar. Elon Musk is there, all these other folks. Like, what are they looking for? What are they trying to achieve with all this spending and with the influence that they've gained with this new administration?
Yeah. And also, if you could just briefly touch on what Gary Gensler has done over the last administration to earn their ire.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with that. Gary Gensler is the chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, which has been fairly aggressive in recent years as far as enforcing securities laws when it comes to the cryptocurrency industry. And the crypto industry hates that. They have maintained that they should not even fall under those laws, that they should not be subject to the Securities and Exchange Commission's enforcement regime. And they've really painted Gary Gensler as this maniacal figure trying to kill crypto, who is pursuing this, they call it regulation by enforcement. He's totally overstepping the bounds of the SEC and just filing these baseless lawsuits against companies and I should mention, the companies that he has gone up against are some of the biggest donors to the political project. Coinbase, Ripple, Kraken, Gemini, all of those companies have had active lawsuits, many of which are still ongoing from the Securities and Exchange Commission. And so Gensler has been this enemy of the cryptocurrency world, although, it's kind of a strange thing because it was under Gensler where Bitcoin ETFs were approved. There was evidence to the contrary around his sort of all-out crypto war that he was supposedly undertaking.
It is this typical kind of tech narrative where they claim that because they're doing this thing with tech, even though it's in a traditional industry, that the old rules shouldn't apply to them. And that's one of the reasons that they're so pissed at Gensler, right?
Right. There's a lot of talk about, securities laws were written in the 1930s. And so how could they possibly apply to blockchains? And it's they apply to high frequency trading. And that wasn't around in 1930 either, but there's all this sort of attempt to spin it as though blockchain is so special and cryptocurrencies are so unique that they need this bespoke regulatory regime.
It's been thus for literally 200 years, since the very first machinery that disrupted a legal regime. They have been argued that it doesn't matter anymore. We need new rules.
Yeah, it's too innovative.
Yeah, it's too innovative. So we need to tear up the old laws that would have prevented me from maximizing my profits or whatever. So yeah, it's a very similar story. And I just wanted to get your read on the lawsuits that Gensler filed. Some of them have resulted in convictions, in successful lawsuits. Was your sense that most of this was legitimate, they were legitimate targets, that they're I think most people who vaguely look at it get the sense that there's a lot of fraud in this world that needed to be reined in. Obviously the Bitcoin advocates don't want the regulation, but it's hard to argue that there's not a ton of fraud going on, right?
Well, we need the SEC to crack down on the Haktua girl, right?
I think there's sort of two classes of lawsuits brought by the SEC when it comes to crypto. So some of them have to do with just outright fraud, FTX being a good example. Obviously, those lawsuits were kind of on hold as the criminal cases played out, but the SEC was very involved there. There are also lawsuits like the one against Coinbase, which don't allege any sort of fraud, but instead are making allegations that basically some of the offerings that Coinbase provides to people through its interface are securities offerings and therefore need to be registered with the SEC, and not doing so is a violation of securities laws. I think the first class of lawsuits has been more or less accepted by people in and outside of the crypto industry. I don't think anyone is mad at the SEC for going after FTX after it collapsed.
It wiped out tons of value, even like, crypto company founders when, lost their company. You would think that you would want some regulatory force to prevent people from losing, their life savings.
Yeah, but after the collapse is okay.
Yeah, you can't prevent the collapse, but after the collapse, right.
Right.
Yeah, no, that is very much the case with a lot of these lawsuits. It's like only after everyone lost all their money do we want the SEC to step in. And in some cases, they're like, why didn't the SEC do anything? And it's like, well,
you've been telling them not to. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, and then there's the cases against Coinbase and things like that. Like, it's in a way the sort of cases that they would have brought against FTX had they done so early. It's about registration, the fact that they're not doing the types of disclosures, there's no audits, there's no consumer protection really. And those cases are seen as completely illegitimate by the cryptocurrency industry. I think outside observers are a little bit mixed on it. I think a lot of us see them as pretty obvious securities offerings and therefore completely well within the SEC's remit. Some people sort of agree with the industry line that there isn't clear enough regulation, and so the SEC should be clarifying this stuff or getting a clearer mandate from Congress before undertaking these enforcement actions. I'm not particularly convinced by that line of argument. For one, the industry kicks and screams whenever the SEC tries to clarify regulations, and also the SEC has been very clear about their stance on cryptocurrencies when it comes to securities regulation, and it has provided no shortage of warnings to these companies before pursuing these enforcement actions. So I think they are broadly legitimate. Whether or not they will continue to exist is a different question, I think.
And that's the big question, right? That's the $1 million question come 2025, because Gensler's going to be out, right?
Yeah. So Trump made a big stink about firing Gary Gensler on day one. There was some question as to whether or not he had the authority to do so, but it was all pretty much a moot point because anytime the administration changes, the SEC chair steps down. It's just like a norm. And Gary Gensler has indicated he plans to do exactly that. And so no more Gary Gensler once Trump is officially in office.
Do we know anything about who might take his place? Are there any rumblings?
It's not even just a rumbling. It's been decided that it's certainly the nomination, at least, will be Paul Atkins, who is a former SEC commissioner. And he is, he's more establishment than some of the Trump picks. He's not Matt Gaetz. He's not Hegseth. He's not one of the sort of like pick some totally random person off the street who promises to burn everything down.
Right, throw a bomb into the office, yeah.
He didn't see someone on Fox News he could just pull out and stick in there.
Yeah, exactly. Just like someone who's sort of handsome that he could put in there. Yeah, so no, he's got the SEC background. He was a commissioner, he was a lawyer at some point. But when he was a commissioner, he was very pro deregulation, and he was a commissioner in the lead up to the 2008 collapse. So we sort of saw some of the fruits of his labors in 2008 and definitely want him back. But since leaving the agency, he has been an advisor to a crypto advocacy group. He, since like 2017, he's been in that role. So I think he is a very pro crypto actor. And unfortunately, as some of these establishment types tend to be, could be very effective in pursuing the types of deregulatory changes he might be looking for.
You think the industry suggested him as the pick?
Oh, 100%. Brian Armstrong, Coinbase's CEO, has been meeting with Trump. Crypto executives have a direct line to not only Trump, but the transition team.
Was Armstrong the CEO of Coinbase? Was he an open Trump supporter?
Yeah, he was one of the few who tried to maintain this sort of neutrality, although a lot of his statements and contributions and actions have, I think, maybe betrayed that a little bit. But he did try to sort of play both sides, I think, in a way that a lot of industry people tried to do after Kamala Harris was sort of entered the scene, where they realized that, like, oh, maybe Trump isn't a sure win. We need to make sure we have friends on both sides in case of any possibility. That seemed to be Armstrong's goal. But he is definitely very active with the Trump administration right now and has been helping to propose people to take important positions. Yeah.
Is Coinbase still the biggest exchange?
In the United States. And they were also the largest single contributor to these super PACs.
Speaking of Armstrong, Coinbase, and lawsuits and legal actions, during the election, you reported that Coinbase was making donations despite the fact that it was a federal contractor at the time those donations were made. Is there any kind of progress on that case? Like, give us a bit of background on what you found, but is there any progress there? And is it likely this just goes away regardless because Trump is coming to power?
So, yeah, during the election, while I was following all of the crypto spending, I noticed that $25 million contributed by Coinbase to the Fair Shake Super PAC. That donation was made during a period of time they should have been prohibited from making any campaign contributions, including contributions to super PACs, because they held a federal contract or were in negotiations for a federal contract. And they actually followed up that donation with a second donation, or they've at least promised to make one. The FEC reports slow down a little bit when it's not active election season, so I don't think it's been confirmed that they have, but I have no reason to doubt that they have. They made a second contribution after I reported about the illegality of the first one and after a complaint was filed with the FEC. So about $50 million in total contributed in violation of these laws. The question then, of course, becomes, is anything going to come of it? And I think even before Trump was elected, there was pretty serious doubt as to that. The FEC is fairly toothless as far as agencies go. Even when they do find companies to have violated these campaign finance laws, the penalties tend to be very small percentages of the amounts that were contributed. And often the amounts that were contributed are sort of given back to the company. So they would get, $50 million back, and then they would pay a fine of maybe a couple $1 million, and everyone would move on.
What a great system.
Yeah, there's really not much to it.
It also just speaks to the fact, like, you have to use like a muscle for it to be effective. Like, you have to develop that muscle. I think a lot of sort of this reaction that people are always talking about, oh, Silicon Valley has lurched to the right. And then they say, well, the Democrats have been so unfair to us. They've been doing all these things, and they all hate Lena Khan as well as Gensler and some of the officials who have just been doing their jobs, right? Like, a lot of these regulatory apparatuses just have been basically kind of called off for decades, even by Democrats, even when there's a clear case for them to be used. Obama neglected to ever sort of have the DOJ investigate Google for becoming a monopoly. There was all of these different points where the state, could have and should have stepped in. But now that they're doing even the bare minimum, like you said, Gensler is not some like crazy radical foaming at the mouth villain. He approved the Bitcoin ETFs, which is something that the industry has wanted forever. He's just like kind of like doing his job. So like we have a situation where when the state is like doing the bare minimum to enforce some regulations, it feels like this crazy punitive thing, and and then the industry can react like it did and sort of sweep away the remaining vestiges of that power, it seems like.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's very true, especially with the FEC, which has long been sort of a politicized agency. They have this rule that there's 6 commissioners on the FEC. They have this rule that no more than 3 of them can be from a single political party. And so what we have right now is an FEC that has 3 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and an independent, which means that the Republicans can just deadlock anything because those 3 votes, are enough to basically tie something, and then nothing happens. And we've seen that happen repeatedly in recent times. So, despite my I went through the motions. I filed the FEC complaint, but I've always been somewhat skeptical of that anything would meaningfully come of it. But, I think that now, especially with Coinbase being such an ally to many of the new incumbents, it's likely that anything that would have come of it potentially will not really happen.
It's wild how that works, right? Like, the judiciary is so shaped by, the political forces of the day, like who holds the political power to be able to shape these things. But I did want to get back to the regulatory question, right? We've talked about Gensler, we've talked about some of this larger approach, but like, what are the types of things that the crypto industry is looking to get through the Trump administration? And how is someone like David Sachs going to help move that forward and make that happen, since he's been appointed to this role where he's advising on AI and crypto, the government, it seems? It's also wild to think of Sachs in that role. Like, it feels like a few years ago, a lot of people who followed this space, who are critics, like, were kind of just learning about Sachs, right? Like, if you were into the history enough, like, you knew who he was, you knew the work that he was doing with Thiel and stuff in the past. But like, he has really emerged as this figure over the past couple of years, it feels like, as trying to stake out his place as like one of these kind of power brokers within the tech industry. So what do you see him as trying to push forward, and what is the industry looking for more broadly? And what are they likely to get, you think?
Well, so a lot of it comes down to the SEC. The idea of removing crypto from the remit of the SEC entirely is still a popular one. The idea that most crypto folks suggest is that the CFTC, the Commodity Future Trading Commission, should be the primary regulator of crypto assets. And, they'll come up with all these reasons as to why they think that should be the case. But it primarily, in reality, comes down to the fact that it's a very small agency. It is underfunded even with its current areas of focus, and it would certainly be underfunded if it was required to take on the entire cryptocurrency industry as a regulator. They're a fairly toothless agency compared to the SEC. So that has always been a big priority of the crypto world, is to get the CFTC established as the regulator and then do nothing about regulations that they should be enforcing. But I mean, I think they're preparing for any possible outcome. They've got a friendly SEC commissioner should the SEC remain a primary regulator, and certainly he will be useful in terms of making all of these annoying lawsuits from the SEC potentially disappear, or, at least be settled on favorable terms. They've got crypto-friendly people lined up to be potentially at the CFTC. And then they have all of these people in Congress who can potentially pass laws that are friendly to the industry. But I think the regulatory authority is one of the big things. And then reducing the types of restrictions on what they are able to do once the regulators have been sort of established. So there are a lot of things that US crypto exchanges are really not allowed to do, a lot of tokens that they don't offer because they are so blatantly securities that there is no real plausible argument against it if the SEC were to pursue it. A lot of lending activities and crypto staking activities have been targeted by the SEC. Those could potentially become acceptable again. Really a lot of opportunities to make just obscene profits really through these various offerings. And then of course, the lack of enforcement when it comes to fraud can be very lucrative.
Yeah, so like basically kind of wiping away a lot of the rules at the casino. So
yeah, exactly. Just broadly deregulation has been the goal, and then limited enforcement of any regulations that may remain.
So David Sachs, for those who don't know, is one of like Elon Musk's right-hand men. He's one of the all-in podcast guys. He's a big VC. He's been a big sort of partner of Peter Thiel for many decades at this point. He's always been a more conservative right-wing guy, and therefore was a little quieter when Silicon Valley had a reputation for being more progressive, or, at least, was more affiliated with the folks like Obama or whatever. And now he's really kind of risen to power. Were you surprised at all when he was selected to be this AI? He's both the AI and crypto czar, I should note, because like both of these things have lumped together under one sort of made up office for him. Were you surprised at all that he was the one who was tapped for this job? And then after that, like this seems like kind of like an Elon project where Elon's like, hey, we should get this guy and give him a job. And then after, I would be curious to hear like where's Trump at in all this? Like what Trump has like a weird like crypto project of his own crypto grift. But yeah, what's the read on Sachs? Was it a surprise? Were people in the crypto community like, sure? And then what do you think Trump thinks about all this?
As you were saying that, I was just imagining like Elon Musk being like, hey, Trump, my buddy needs a job. Like, can you like hook him up?
He's desperate.
He's got a podcast,
The podcaster to advisor pipeline has been very strong. So you guys are on the right track.
It's going to work for us.
We're building it at the base early. So when the pendulum swings the other way.
Yeah, you'll be lined right up. Yeah, I mean, I think Sachs might have been more surprising to me if it wasn't a combined crypto AI role, because he certainly has crypto investments and, he's backed various crypto firms, but he's not like the biggest guy out there as far as crypto goes.
Yeah, that was my sense too.
Yeah, I mean, like Andreessen, for example, has been, a very clear advocate for crypto this whole time. And so like he would be a fairly obvious choice for something like that. Don't get any ideas, Trump. I'm sure you're listening.
Don't make it happen. Yeah. He listens to System Crash as religiously as he watches Fox News.
Yeah.
So.
But yeah, so I think, with the AI side of things, it's not that surprising, especially that Sachs was chosen. He's got the right political ideology. He's got the right sort of deregulatory agenda. He's really bought into the sort of slash the government type of initiatives that Musk and others have been extolling.
Am I right that he was also there kind of early on in making that connection between Silicon Valley and Donald Trump, like this time around in this cycle?
Yeah, I mean, he, like you said, he's a power broker. He's a networker. He's a true Peter Thiel.
He was one of the few who wasn't afraid to go like, come to our fundraiser for Trump in Silicon Valley. So I'm sure that earned him some points. Yeah.
Yeah, he's been very publicly right wing.
I think he helped with the Vance pick as well.
Oh, yeah. I have no doubt about that. Yeah. So, he's, unabashedly right wing. He's very involved in the tech scene. He's sort of the PayPal mafia type of person. So a pretty obvious pick there, I think.
Yeah. And what about Trump? What does Trump think about crypto? What's we deal with his weird stuff?
Yeah, so Trump has done quite the U-turn on crypto in the past couple of years. He used to be very critical of it. He saw it as a threat to the dollar. He thought it was a scam. He thought Bitcoin was based on thin air, all sorts of things. But people in the crypto world have sort of conveniently memory hold a lot of that in favor of his more recent statements about crypto, which he thinks is just the best thing since sliced bread. He thinks he says that Bitcoin is this major promising asset, that it should all be made in America, that the US should be the crypto capital of the world. And, he's praised Bitcoin specifically and crypto more broadly, largely in the wake of his own sort of grifts in the crypto space. He's had NFTs for a long time. His wife did NFTs for a while. And then, of course, as you alluded to, he has this more recent crypto token and this ostensible crypto project, although there's still not much clarity around what it's supposed to do.
I feel like after a Trump election or a Trump news site, there's always just like, oh, like there's a picture of him with a guitar with a bald eagle on it. He's selling those. Oh, there's a Trump crypto coin. Like it's just like a stream. You can all just kind of like lock it in a cellar somewhere. But yeah, what was that? Can you explain that?
Yeah, so he's been selling these tokens for a project called World Liberty Financial, which is supposedly affiliated with Trump, but not run by Trump. But I think that is something that should be taken with quite a grain of salt. His whole family is involved with it. Barron Trump even is a part of it.
It sounds like the perfect amalgam, the combination of like an email newsletter that's sent to boomers and like Bitcoin and with in Trump world.
Like the name just sounds like a scam, I think. And a lot of the branding is like gold and chrome and, it just looks sketchy.
Like gaudy.
Well, it looks Trumpy. Like that's his whole brand, right? Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so it's this very weird thing. There's this token that you can buy, but the actual project has been very light on details. They claim it's going to be some sort of decentralized finance thing, but of course, the whole project is incredibly centralized. There is no decentralization happening there. One of the Trump sons, I forget if it's John Jr. or Eric Trump, but one of them keeps talking about how they're going to be doing loans. And he talks about, he ran into difficulty obtaining a loan at some point, believe it or not. And that has inspired him to want to create a project where people who can't get loans otherwise are able to get loans. And like, that's all well and good, but he doesn't seem to understand that lending in the crypto world is not the same thing as lending in real life, where in real life, if you decide you want to go get a loan, it's often because you don't have the assets you need to buy a house or buy a car or do some sort of big purchase. In the crypto world, loans are purely over-collateralized loans, which means that you have some big pile of Bitcoin or some other asset, and you want to borrow a lesser amount of US dollars or something like that. That is the only type of DeFi lending that is possible, because you have to operate in this trustless world where you don't know who's on the other end of the loan. You don't know what their financial situation is. And if they were to run off with the money that they borrowed, you have no way of sort of pursuing them for it. There is no legal apparatus really that could come after you. And so you have to basically set up these loans where if they run off with all the money, you're fine because you have more Bitcoin than they borrowed in terms of USD or whatever. So like Trump Jr. is out here promising this lending thing based on this story about loans that are not possible in the crypto world. And so I think that to some extent, they don't even know what they're doing with this project, and that they're just selling these tokens, hoping that people who just love Trump will buy them as, I don't know, collectibles or something.
Right, just pouring some money in.
Yeah, and they figure out the project later on, maybe, if they decide to continue with it.
Right. Do you think it's just like purely the fact that he's got different people around him this go round, that, you know, that he's gotten some traction from the Elon loving crowd now, and that he's just got some different advisors? Because that's just what it seems to me, where maybe last, like, you know, 8 years ago, he was drawing much more from like his cronies in the worlds of old finance capital. And they were saying like, yeah, the Bitcoin, we don't know. And it's just like purely, like a different sort of architecture of advisees and partners. And now it's like this crew that like loves Elon, loves Trump, wants the deregulation, and you think he's just responding to that?
Well, it's like money talks, isn't it?
I think that's a big part of it. Yeah, a lot of these guys are just disgustingly wealthy, and Trump normally has been attracted to that. But I think a lot has really changed in the crypto industry as well that makes it a little bit more normal that this is happening. You know, you referred to earlier some of the crypto ideology around, you know, anti-establishment, anti-government even. You know, a lot of the early ideology around Bitcoin was that we shouldn't have governments involved with our money. We don't want banks even knowing what we're doing, much less preventing what we're doing, banks or governments. We don't want an asset that is controlled by financial institutions where you have to pass through all these intermediaries like brokerages and things like that. A lot of that has been really left by the wayside by the cryptocurrency industry, although they often still allude to that ideology when it's convenient. But, you know, a lot of these companies, if you look at Coinbase, it is actually pretty similar to these financial institutions that they claim to try to circumvent, where you have to provide your ID to Coinbase. You have to upload a picture of your passport so they can make sure that you're not doing money laundering. They can freeze your account with no reason whatsoever, and they regularly do. You know, there are all of these sort of parallels between the crypto industry and the supposed antithesis of crypto. And I think that that has really played into making crypto more of a palatable ally to someone like Donald Trump, because, you know, they are no longer seen to be, you know, this like anti-government movement. It's really just about enrichment of the early players and the executives. It's about pursuing these very aligned, often political goals. And I think that maybe wasn't as much the case during Trump's original presidency.
And the crypto industry kind of organized itself and lobbied for some of this stuff and installed its folks in places of where they had access to power.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing is like the broader crypto world has decided that they accept this. You know, even though this type of lobbying, this type of power brokerage, this type of behavior is, again, opposed to a lot of what they claim to stand for, it is benefiting them financially. And so a lot of people are willing to hold their noses or at least try to justify how this is actually good for the crypto movement. Or, you know, there's a lot of the sentiment that, you know, okay, I guess we have to ally up with these sort of strange bedfellows, you know, in order to achieve crypto's goals, which I think is a very naive thing, because I think that a lot of people who are still ideological about crypto and who are, you know, holding crypto for these supposed reasons are very much overestimating the extent to which the executives in power who are contributing all of this money or who are taking positions like David Sachs care about the crypto ideology or the ability of the little guy to trade Bitcoin permissionlessly or, you know, whatever it might be.
Well, it feels like that broader reflection of tech libertarianism more generally, right? You know, this notion that they want to be separate from government or whatever, but in reality, this recognition that a lot of these people who claimed this libertarian politics, this libertarian approach, have very right-wing politics and have recognized that in order to defend their interests, they need to make sure that they capture the state and make sure the state is working for them. And it feels like what's happening in crypto is just a reflection of a broader trend there, where they see what is going to benefit them, what is going to ensure that maybe more people use crypto, or at least, these VCs can profit off of, the crypto industry as a whole. And so this is the direction that they're going to go.
And I have a hunch that they're not going to complain all that much if the number keeps going up. Even
yeah,
though
that does tend to help things a little bit.
Yeah.
Molly, this is so fascinating to learn about the crypto industry, what's happening with it, how it's influencing not just US politics, but like so much more, because I'm sure we're all going to feel the effects of this. But to close off our episode, we like to note a few stories that have happened over the past week, so, people are familiar with these sort of things. The first one, I guess, is that OpenAI has released its Sora video model to the public as it seeks to gain, a bit more positive attention for its generative AI efforts. Of course, Brian and I were talking about ChatGPT's big second birthday in the last episode. And it's also launched a new ChatGPT Pro subscription for the low price of $200 a month. What do you make of this?
Yeah, that price tag is the most notable thing, $200 a month. It's almost like they don't want too many people, using the more intensive systems, because right now, every time somebody does a query on ChatGPT for free, they lose money because it uses so much compute and so much energy. And Sora, we don't know a whole lot about Sora in terms of sort of what it requires to run, but you can imagine computing and generating an entire sort of assemblage of video is even more intensive than the image creation or the text production. So I think this can be seen, more as like, we want to get a headline out there. We want to get like a story about our progress out there before the year's end. So kind of all of this like negativity about the models sort of not progressing as fast as we hoped and we had promised, facing new pressures from Elon Musk in the White House, who happens to hate our CEO and co-founder Sam Altman, and a bunch of big question marks about sort of how the enterprise business is going. So to me, this is like kind of a big advertisement saying, hey, we're finally doing it, $200 a month, but yeah, your Sora's out there and you can mess with it, and maybe we'll get a little bit of lift from that.
Yeah, I read a lot of people who tried to access the Sora model once it was supposedly made public actually ran into a barrier and couldn't actually get in there.
I couldn't use it either. Yeah, I tried.
Yeah, because you tried out. I know. Yeah.
If you pay $200.
Yeah. Our second story is Cruise. Maybe you've heard of it. It's the big competitor to Waymo, as these robo-taxi or self-driving car companies. Has operated on the streets of some cities in the United States, but recently ran into some trouble in San Francisco after a collision with a pedestrian that kicked up a lot of controversy. Well, GM CEO Mary Barra, GM of course owns the company Cruise, announced that they're shutting that down. All of the investment that they've put into making this thing, they have decided it's not worth it to keep going anymore. And, they're ending it at the same time as we have had, I feel like, I wrote about this recently, all of this kind of positive reception of self-driving cars again because of the AI hype moment that we're in, with Waymo expanding to new cities. And of course, Tesla claiming that its robotaxi is going to be here in just a few years. Finally, it's going to happen.
This time it's for real. Full self-driving. This time. Yeah.
Yeah, but it feels very notable that, at the same time as supposedly everything is great in self-driving land, GM is like, this is costing us way too much money. We are getting out of this space. It does not make any sense for us to keep kind of pushing this narrative.
How much did they drop? Like $50 billion?
So I was reading the article and it seemed like they were hoping to bring in $50 billion in revenue, I think it was. But they have still spent like billions and billions of dollars in trying to make this thing a reality. Because they were one of those companies that got in on self-driving in the 2010s when all these companies were getting into it because it looked like the next big thing. And they kind of held on as a lot of companies got out. And I think it's not really a surprise to me that they're getting out at this moment. And honestly, I'm surprised that they stuck with it this long. Yeah, but it seemed like a notable story to put out there for people to think about.
Yeah, I mean, Waymo is certainly still expanding, and we don't know the details of the expenditures and the investment. Google's obviously just a monolithic company. It can just pour more money into this. GM's pretty big too. It wasn't always as clear to me what the core motivation was. I guess GM would then make the vehicles, and then they'd be the taxis, and they'd have like multiple potential profit streams. times. But yeah, it really was this accident where it dragged a pedestrian in San Francisco and they got booted out of the city. And honestly, Uber had an accident where one of their self-driving experimental cars struck and killed a pedestrian in 2018, years ago. And that was the end of that. So Waymo has not had one of these catastrophic accidents. And, I think it's the last one standing. And I think Cruise is basically admitting that Waymo has won. Again, it's still not clear to me what the profit picture is. You need something like market dominance in order to, even hope for something like profits. If you're going to have a taxi business that's going to compete with Uber or something, I think it's just, we're still so many miles away. But yeah, fascinating story.
Yeah, my view has always been that GM got into that space because they were hoping that by investing in self-driving cars that their share price would start to get priced more like a tech stock than a traditional auto stock.
Right, like Tesla.
Exactly. And it never quite paid off. But our final story of the week, Molly, we're going to bring you back in for this one. People have heard of this Hawk Tuah girl who has turned her 15 minutes of fame into a big influencer career at this point. Well, she got in on the crypto grift with her Hawk coin over the past week. And no surprise, it soared and then it dropped again, as seems like it was a traditional pump and dump scheme, which everyone should have expected. Molly, what went on here? And is she going to face, well, I guess with Trump coming in, she's not going to face many repercussions, but what do you make of it?
She'll probably get a cabinet position. Yeah, so it followed kind of the typical meme coin trend line where it surged and then it absolutely crashed. And there's a lot of theories about why that happened. Some people have accused her or her team of rug pulling and basically draining all the money out of the token to benefit themselves.
What does that mean for those not familiar with the crypto jargon? What's a rug pull?
Yeah, so it means basically abandoning the project, not following through on any of the promises, and often, withdrawing such substantial amounts of money that the token crashes and everyone who held it lost money.
Well, because you pull out when it's up, right?
Because you make the money, yeah. And so, there's some of that, and that's obviously illegal. That could potentially result in at least civil consequences. But, the story that she is told is that it was all because of these so-called token snipers, which is where when you first launch a crypto token, it can be very shaky as the price sort of stabilizes. And so there are these bots basically that take advantage of that weirdness around token launches and can also result in these types of outcomes. I mean, there's a lot of reasons that it may have done what it did. I think maybe the real story is that, why are people not expecting this at this point from meme coins? This is how meme coins go.
Who is buying these at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the thought process behind people who are involved in trading these meme coins is really we know it's a scam, we know it's going to go to zero, but if we can buy it early enough and cash out soon enough, we will be the ones who profit from the scam and don't get totally wrecked by the scam. But, that only works for a couple of people. And often by the time you even have the opportunity to buy the token, you're too late. And so people get washed out in the way that they just did with this particular coin.
So wait, you're trying to tell me that there's not people out there going, I think this is the one. I think the Hawk Tuah meme coin is the one that's going to supplant Bitcoin.
Yeah. Well, and the really funny thing is, she's trying to sort of do some reputation management after the fact. She's like, this wasn't a cash grab. I wasn't trying to scam my devoted fans that apparently exist.
From 6 days ago that I got.
Yeah. But then a journalist asked her, okay, so what was the point then? Why launch a token if not just to get cash? And she's like, oh, it's for the community. And she's like, and the journalist asks, what does the community get? And, Haley Welch, the Hawk Tuah girl, basically has no answer to that. It's like, you can give me money.
That's what it always bottomed out with the NFT stuff and a lot of the Web3. It's like, it feels good to contribute to the community with my JPEG that's currently worth $14,000 and that I can sell you. Yeah, right? It's for the community that is helping me profit, right? Is that where?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, we know that people are going to have plenty of opportunity to get in on plenty of more interesting crypto investment opportunities
in the next 4 years.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Can't wait.
Molly, thanks so much for being our first guest on System Crash. It was really great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me. It was an honor.
We'll send you your commemorative meme coin via email or your preferred
Yeah,
Bitcoin
you're gonna make
wallet.
me an NFT.
Yeah. We're getting in, we're offering new opportunities because this is the way things are going. It's the way of the future. System Crash is hosted by Paris Marks and Brian Merchant. Production is by Eric Wickham. Our theme music is Dystopia by our good friends in Yacht. Support the show on patreon.com/systemcrashpod to get a monthly bonus episode. Thanks so much for listening.